Hong Kong, August 1971. The afternoon heat still lingered inside the private gym of the Miramar Hotel, even with the ceiling fans turning overhead like tired propellers. The tall windows let in a white, motionless light that spread across the polished floor and the steel bars. Outside, Nathan Road boiled with taxis, neon signs, and watch vendors. Inside, time seemed thicker. The sounds were few and precise. The brush of a jump rope striking the floor. The dry thud of a weight returning to its rack. The distant murmur of traffic turned into background noise. It was one of those places where men went to build an image of themselves. And sometimes, without knowing it, to lose it. Bruce Lee stood beside a wooden platform, finishing a short series of kicks into the air. He wore no uniform, nothing that suggested ceremony. Dark training pants, a fitted t-shirt already marked with sweat, light sneakers. Every movement ended before it could become a spectacle. He did not strike the air with violence. He passed through it with precision. Then he stopped completely, as if stillness were part of the same blow. Nearby, on a bench, there was a bottle of water, a folded towel, and a small notebook filled with handwritten notes. Bruce was preparing for a meeting about a new production. In him, work and training seemed like the same discipline seen from two different angles. Some hotel guests recognized him as they passed. They murmured his name and kept walking. Bruce did not respond to that attention with hostility or pride. He simply did not work for it. He did not seem busy trying to impress anyone. He seemed busy trying to stay awake. At 4:20, Victor Hallberg walked in, 30 years old, a European bodybuilding competitor passing through Hong Kong on his way to a commercial exhibition in Tokyo. He stood 6'3", 265 pounds of disciplined mass, built over 8 years of weights and exact dieting. Enormous chest, rounded shoulders. He wore a sand-colored sleeveless shirt, white track pants, and a quiet confidence, the kind of confidence men develop after being admired for too long. He did not walk quickly. He did not need to. Space usually opened for him. He was accompanied by 2 local promoters and a magazine photographer. They had come down to the gym because someone told them the Chinese actor everyone was talking about trained there. One of the promoters wanted a casual photo. Easy publicity. Victor agreed in good humor. In his mind, Bruce Lee was an athletic actor, very fast perhaps, but not a threat to anyone his size. In Victor's world, the body was a visible declaration. The more imposing it looked, the more truth it seemed to contain. What is seen first rules. When he saw Bruce training, he smiled. It was not a cruel smile at first. It was worse. It was condescending. Bruce had just finished a sequence of straight punch, sidestep, and short elbow against a pad held by a student. The speed did not look natural. Not because it was exaggerated, but because it left no residue. Nothing extra remained. Victor watched for a few seconds with his head slightly tilted. Then he looked at his own arms, then Bruce's, and in his expression appeared the automatic calculation he was used to making. He compared mass to mass, size to size, and because he had made that comparison thousands of times since he was 22, he believed he knew the result before reality had a chance to speak. One of the promoters made the introduction. "Mr. Lee, this is Victor Hallberg, guest champion from Europe. Victor, this is Bruce Lee." Bruce offered a slight nod. Victor extended his hand with a broader smile, almost brotherly. Bruce shook it without visible effort. The photographer prepared his camera. Everything seemed headed toward a simple, empty scene. But the mistake was already there. It only lacked a voice. Victor looked at Bruce's torso and gave a brief nasal laugh. He said he had expected to find a larger legend. The promoter smiled out of obligation. Bruce looked at him for a fraction of a second, without annoyance, and set the towel down on the bench. Victor continued. He said he admired the speed. He said that for the movies it must work very well. Then he added, in that relaxed voice some men use when they insult while pretending to converse, that in a real confrontation the small body always ends up remembering the truth of the big body. The temperature in the gym changed without the fans stopping their spin. Bruce did not answer right away. He picked up the bottle, took a short drink, and set it back down. Only then did he look up. He asked Victor whether he trained to move weight or to understand it. The question sounded calm, not polite. Victor let out a fuller laugh. He said he did not need to understand much to crush someone who weighed 150 pounds. He said strength is not philosophy. Strength is strength. It was a simple sentence, and that was why it revealed so much. Bruce stepped toward the platform. as if inviting him into a space only slightly more open than the rest of the gym. There was no theatrical tension in his posture, only clarity. He said that strength without direction usually falls in love with its own appearance. He also said that a body can be very large and still be clumsy, just as a door can be very heavy and still be opened by the right key. He said it as if he were describing a mechanism. Victor was no longer smiling so easily. When a man has lived for a long time inside visible superiority, the smallest contradiction feels like disrespect. What he could not bear was not yet the idea that Bruce might beat him. He had not gone that far. What he could not bear was that Bruce did not seem impressed. In other rooms, his size had set the tone of the conversation from the first second. Here, that was not happening. He asked Bruce whether he was saying he could take him down. Bruce replied that he was saying something simpler. That size can intimidate at a distance, but at close range the only thing that matters is what the body knows how to do before it thinks. The photographer still stood motionless with the camera hanging from his neck. The promoters no longer wanted a photo. They wanted the whole thing to end without discomfort. One of them tried to laugh. He suggested they all go upstairs for coffee. No one listened. Victor stepped forward. It was not yet open aggression. It was the kind of invasion that forces the other person to step back without having to touch him. He entered Bruce's personal space with his chest forward and his chin slightly lowered. It was an old language. It said, "I want you to remember your place." Bruce did not step back. Not 1 inch. That was what truly wounded Victor. Not the sentence. Not the comparison to a door. It was the physical fact that the smaller man did not move. So Victor did what men do when they no longer fully trust their own authority. He exaggerated it. He extended a hand and pressed 2 fingers against Bruce's shoulder, as though correcting the position of a suitcase on a shelf. An almost ridiculous gesture. A gesture designed to diminish the other man without assuming the full cost of an attack. Bruce lowered his gaze to those fingers. Then he raised it again. He said, "Take your hand away." The calmness of the sentence made it sound worse. Victor did not remove it. He smiled again and said, "Go on, show me. I want to see how much your ideas weigh." Bruce took 1 breath. Nothing more. Those standing around would later remember that he did not seem to prepare himself. He did not tense his shoulders. He did not seek a stance. He announced nothing. That is why no one saw the moment begin. They only saw its consequences arrange themselves with a speed impossible to argue with. In the first second, Bruce's left hand caught Victor's wrist and emptied it of direction with a short outward turn. It was a minimal correction, as if he had found a hidden hinge inside the bodybuilder's arm. The enormous chest kept moving forward on the inertia of its own pride. The base was already compromised. In the second, Bruce stepped inside the frontal line, so close that size stopped being an advantage and became an obstacle. His right shoulder feinted upward just enough to lift Victor's attention. The real technique came low, a short vertical strike, driven precisely into the solar plexus. Not to impress, to shut down. In the 3rd second, the air vanished from Victor's body as if someone had shut a door inside his chest. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes widened with the surprise of a man discovering that his equations did not describe the world, only his habit. His knees did not give way immediately. First they tried to understand. Then they failed. In the 4th second, Bruce swept the supporting leg with a movement so restrained it almost seemed like a natural consequence of the earlier imbalance. There was no extra violence. Only the exact decision to take away from the large body the one place where it could still pretend to have control. In the 5th second, 265 pounds of muscle hit the gym floor with a dull, massive final impact. Victor lay on his back, conscious, staring at the ceiling, searching for air with the silent desperation of a man who has just understood that breathing is not automatic when someone knows how to interrupt it. And that was all. There was no exchange, no battle, only a brief, clinical sequence in which one man confused volume with dominance, and another showed him the difference without raising his voice. No one moved right away. The photographer forgot to take the shot. One of the promoters took half a step toward Victor and stopped, as if he still could not accept that the body on the floor belonged to the same man who, 5 seconds earlier, had filled the room with his confidence. Bruce's student still held the pad against his chest, motionless. Bruce stepped back twice. He did not follow Victor to the floor. He did not add another technique. He did not need to convince anyone of anything. He picked up the towel, dried his hands, and said with complete normality that someone should lift Mr. Hallberg's legs a little and give him a few seconds. His tone was the same one he might have used to correct the angle of an elbow during training. That was what unsettled everyone most. Not the speed, the normality. For Bruce, the scene did not seem like a feat, it seemed like the inevitable demonstration of a simple truth. The body that knows only how to look at itself ends up being slow even when it is explosive. The body trained to respond without clinging to a form arrives first, even if it is shorter and lighter. It took Victor almost a full minute to recover enough air to rise onto one elbow. His face had lost color. His chest rose and fell in short spasms. He looked at Bruce with a new kind of attention, an attention that was no longer trying to classify itself above the other man. Now it was trying to understand what kind of mistake he had made. And what was terrible for him was that the mistake was not in one single decision. It was in an entire vision of the world. For years, the mirror had told him that his size was an answer. Bruce had just shown him that it was barely a badly phrased question. Victor tried to stand too soon and had to brace himself against the bench. One of the promoters tried to break the silence by saying it had been a misunderstanding. Bruce interrupted him with a slight motion of the hand. He said no. It had not been a misunderstanding. It had been a belief. The belief that looking powerful and being dangerous are the same thing. He smiled faintly, without mockery. Victor lowered his head. Nothing remained of the man who had walked in expecting a friendly photo with a smaller actor. Now he stood before someone who had not defended his ego. He had defended a principle. Ego needs witnesses. Principle needs only precision. With his breathing still broken, Victor asked how it had been possible. He did not ask about the strike or the sweep. He asked how his advantage could have disappeared so quickly. Bruce answered without haste. He told him that size is useful until it becomes identity. That when a man trusts too much in what he weighs, he begins to move as if the other person must obey his presence. And in that moment, he leaves openings. He leaves announcements. He leaves intention exposed. A large body can be a fortress, but a fortress is not worth much if it always opens the same door. Victor listened in silence. Bruce continued. He said that real strength does not begin in the muscle. It begins in coordination, in timing, in the ability not to argue with the situation, to enter where the other person still believes he is safe. He said that a rigid man ends up carrying his own defeat written into his posture, and that the prouder he is of that posture, the more visible he becomes to the one who knows how to read it. No one around them interrupted. The scene had changed in nature. It was no longer a confrontation. It was the dissection of an illusion still warm on the floor. Victor sat on the bench and rested his forearms on his knees. He looked smaller that way, not in size, but in the way he occupied the air. This defeat was opening him inward. For the first time in a long time, he was not defending his image. He was looking at the mechanism that had built it. He remembered his years of training, the hours of isolation, the obsessive precision with food, the endless repetitions, the admiration in locker rooms. The unearned favors the world grants to those who seem difficult to challenge. All of it had mixed together until it formed a comfortable lie. If everyone stepped aside, it had to be because he was truly superior. Bruce had just separated those two things with brutal clarity. They did not step aside because he was invincible. They stepped aside because they did not want to argue with his appearance. The difference between respect and other people's calculation fell on him with more weight than his own body. Bruce walked to the bottle, took another drink, and said something Victor would remember for years. He said that muscles are good servants and terrible masters. If you turn them into the master, you will end up obeying what is visible and neglecting what decides. The sentence sounded exact. The photographer, who finally seemed to have returned to the world, put his camera away without taking a single picture. He understood that any photograph of that moment would lie. The camera would show one huge man sitting down and another smaller man standing. It would not show the idea that had just collapsed. Victor raised his eyes and said, with difficulty, that he had been wrong. He said it like a man pronouncing for the first time a truth that did not favor him. Bruce nodded. There was no triumph in his face. He replied that being wrong was not the problem. The problem was building an identity so rigid that no correction could enter without breaking something. He added that sometimes what breaks is precisely what must be broken. Outside, the city still roared. Inside the gym, the fans kept turning with the same mechanical patience as at the beginning. Nothing in the outside world had changed. And yet, for Victor, everything had shifted a few degrees. The same benches, the same bars, the same white light on the floor. But he no longer occupied the center of the scene, either inside the gym or inside himself. And that, too, was a relief. He stood up more carefully this time. He did not try to recover his earlier tone. He did not try to joke. He asked Bruce, almost in a low voice, for a recommendation. Where should someone begin if he wanted to stop training only the appearance of power? Bruce answered that he should begin by learning to move without announcing himself, that he should study boxing, that he should study wrestling, that he should jump rope until he could hear his own rhythm without the noise of ego, and above all, that he should stop using the mirror as the final judge. The mirror is useful for correcting lines, not for measuring truth. Victor nodded again. This time, no one doubted the sincerity of the gesture. That night, at a dinner with promoters, he spoke little. He understood that the exhibition of muscle convinces strangers, but precision convinces destiny. And from that afternoon on, he stopped training to be admired and started training never to lie to himself again. For the first time in years, he did not enjoy telling anecdotes about his size, or about smaller men who had stepped aside, or about how impressive it was to walk into a room and feel silence open. He understood that this kind of silence was not reverence. It was simple conflict management. And he understood something worse too. He had been living by feeding on that misunderstanding. Months later, he changed part of his training. He did not abandon weights, but he stopped worshiping them. He began learning footwork, breathing, coordination, timing. He lost some volume and gained something much less visible. He no longer needed to walk into a place believing that his body should decide the conversation before his character did. Some acquaintances did not like the change. They said he was going soft. Victor did not argue. He had discovered that true hardness does not lie in preserving a heavy mask, but in allowing truth to break it. Many years later, when someone asked him about the most important lesson of his physical life, he did not speak of trophies or stages. He spoke of a hotel gym in Hong Kong, of a motionless August afternoon, of a small man who was not impressed by 265 pounds of muscle and needed 5 seconds to separate strength from its caricature. Because that day Bruce Lee did not bring down a body. He brought down a false idea of power.